Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. This is the second virtual, but third engagement in our summer and fall training series through the National Research Center on Nutrition and Aging. We are talking about today is launching your innovation journey. Our fearless leader today is Greg Farley, and he will be leading us through today's webinar. Again, we are going to be engaging with you through the chat function on the right-hand side of your screen. At different points, we'll be doing polling and inviting you to share your thoughts with us through the chat. So, Greg, I'll turn it over to you, and please be sure to stay involved and stay engaged. Thank you so much, Greg. Take it away.
All right. Thank you very much, Uche. Yes, it was great meeting all of you folks in person in Dallas. And if you weren't there, we're gonna quickly review what we did in Dallas. But here's the big picture of what we're gonna walk through in the next 45 minutes. So we're gonna talk about how, one of our main things in Dallas was finding a project to do. And so today we'll talk about how to take that ball downfield further and score, so to speak. Not to get into sports analogies so early. We're going to talk about a concept called accountability, which you're familiar with, but we're going to talk about that in some detail. We're going to talk about teams, which are important to projects, although sometimes the team is just yourself. But when it isn't just yourself, this is when this comes into play. We'll talk about your roadmap for the future and, next steps in relationship to your innovation journey. So with that, let's move on to, I think, the first polling question. Aha, so there we are. Where are you in your project innovation journey? Are you, so select one of the following for us, if you would. At the very beginning, you have no ideas for projects. And boy, I hope that's not true. Two is, the second bullet is full of ideas, have no project plan or mandate. And mandates are something that we talked about in Dallas. Three, you do have an innovation project idea, project plan, and or a mandate. So, if you have that idea and plan, but don't have a mandate, I would still select that one. Overseeing the implementation of a project plan right now. So you've taken some steps, action steps, and you're doing things in the actual project. That would be great if you're there and have actually completed a project and can talk to us and share with us related to what you learned. So touch now and click your mouse on your favorite selection, and we will soon see results. Okay, so good thing so of you are not at the very beginning. 29% are in idea mode. 29, 29. Interesting. So equally dispersed, sort of in the middle of the project, basically, full of ideas, are sort of in process or just have an idea. And then finally, there's a small group of people, about 14%, which actually is pretty good given the fact that Dallas was only 5-6 weeks ago that you're done with the project and can talk to us about it. So that is wonderful. Okay, so that gives me an idea of where you folks are at, and I think our content is pretty well suited to that state of affairs. So, okay, this is what we talked about in Dallas, and I won't go through that graphic on the right in detailed mode, but basically what you're seeing there is the process by which you might walk a project through. And this is something that you would probably do organically anyway, at least some of these steps. If you didn't have this graphic or this process in front of you, you would still have to form a team. You would still have to come up with a question. You would still have to generate ideas. You would still have to select some ideas. You'd still have to pitch for resources and get a project implemented by those who are in charge of whatever the idea is concerned with. So now I'll make this offer again. I made it in Dallas and I'll make it again. If you folks want more help with the innovation process that you see there, I'm happy to talk to you individually, either via the phone or via the, trying to think of the, I want to get the exact name right here, the National Resource Center for Nutrition and Aging. Happy to work with you on their website or their sharing website. So in Dallas, we talked about coming up with project ideas and framing up a question that you generate ideas for. And we did a tool called challenge mapping for that was a way to explore the various options when it comes to the problem frame. And we walk through this process that you see on the right. And then we had a worksheet for mapping out a series of continuous projects over the next few years, which you started in Dallas. And I'm hoping that you did more work on or did some more thinking about since then. And realizing that these plans are bound to change, but the mere idea that you're working on that list of projects for the future, because that's really all it is, basically, means you're thinking about what projects you might do in the future. So just working on it is kind of an incubation that gets you to more projects, more interesting projects, more doable projects, etc. So let's move on. Okay, so let's talk about this accountability concept. So I don't know if you folks are familiar with a concept called a mastermind group. But years ago, there was a guy by the name of Napoleon Hill who wrote a book called Think and Grow Rich. And he was a very influential guy, although he's somewhat controversial today. But one of the concepts that he introduced the world to in his book, which is like one of the top 10 best-selling self-help books of all time, is the whole notion of being accountable to a group of people who can give you help and can hold you accountable to what you say you're going to do. And I can tell you from personal experience that having someone, even just one person, to be accountable to, or a team that you're accountable to, or a mastermind group, as Napoleon Hill would have talked about, makes a big difference in terms of what you actually end up doing. Because when you know you're accountable, and I know you folks know this because in some respect you've always been accountable to someone about things or just to somebody about something. When you're held accountable, you do things. You say, oh, if I said I would do something on that project by Friday, and it's Wednesday, and you know you're going to have to talk to somebody on Friday, you've got an extra motivation to actually get something done. And that's what it's all about, is actually taking measurable steps and then reporting that back to others. So leaders need to be accountable to someone, even if you're the CEO of your organization where you are now, and you're the main person. You should be accountable to someone. Could be outside your group, could be your board, could be someone who works for you, but you have a relationship with where they will hold you accountable to things. And so here's the thing. Let's imagine that you're working on an innovation project and you hit a stumbling block. And I don't know if you're at all like me, but when that happens to me and I'm working completely on my own, I will sometimes wander in confusion and in depression, and I'm not really joking, for quite a while before I will really confront the problem and remove the fear from my mindset and start to address it. And sometimes when you hit that first roadblock or a big roadblock, you never do confront the fear, or you never do confront the conflict that it represents. And guess what happens? The project fails as a result. So one of the values of having somebody that you're accountable to is not just that they're cracking the whip on you, so to speak, but it's that they can help you find ways through the blocks in your project. So just sometimes a brief discussion is enough to sort of free you up and get you through a block in your thinking, and you together might come up with some ideas for how to address the block and get through it. So twofold value. A, you're motivated to get things done and to do things. And B, when you do hit a roadblock, to work through it through dialogue and brainstorming. Okay, let's move on. Now, the reason we're mentioning all this, by the way, is because we're going to ask you if you'd like to be paired up with one of your peers for an accountability call and sort of a check-in. And I highly recommend doing this because I guarantee you it will make your projects more likely to be successful. So how it works, and it's pretty straightforward, is when you talk to someone, you basically report back on what you committed to doing. So maybe you committed to do 3 things, and you did 2 of them, but you didn't do 1 of them. So you'll talk about the things you did, the things that you didn't do, and why you didn't do them. And so if there's a why I didn't do something, then you have a chat about how you can get through that block. And then you wrap up the call with what's next. What are you committing to do and accomplish by the next time we talk to each other? And it might be once a week that you chat. It might be once every 2 weeks. It might even be once a month. But whatever that time frame is for you, and I would recommend the shorter time frames rather than the longer ones. You'll review on the next call what you committed to, and that's how it works. It's pretty straightforward. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so I'm going to talk now about the things that tend to happen when you form teams and you try to get some kind of project underway and to get it done. And I have a slide that's coming up in one slide where I'm going to talk about what the typical pattern of team behavior is, and that's called the Tuckman model, but I'm not going to go there just this second. First, I'm going to talk about a very, very good book that I highly recommend, and it's Patrick Lencioni's, and I neglected to put that attribution on this slide, so maybe if you distribute these slides after the webinar, if you could just please add that graphic as attributed to a gentleman named Patrick Lencioni. And he wrote a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of Team. Now, The 5 Dysfunctions of Team is written as a business novel, and it's only about 180 pages. So it is a kind of a fictionalized case study of a team and the typical challenges that teams go through. I highly recommend that you read the book if you're working with teams. And this graphic, the pyramid that you see in front of you, are the classic problems that happen in teams. And so let's just start at the bottom and walk up through this pyramid. The first thing that happens is if you don't have basic trust on your team, then you're going to have challenges because people won't be free to be self-expressed. They won't come up with ideas. They won't do what they say they're going to do. There's that accountability thing happening again. And you basically will be a very dysfunctional team. But let's imagine you have trust. The next thing that happens is conflict. So the fear of conflict in particular, and I will cite from personal experience, this is one of those things that happens in corporate America, and by that I mean nonprofits as well, that blocks teams from becoming highly productive. And by the way, just from other sources in the team building world, only about 20% of teams are what the team experts would call truly high function. And if you want to become a high function team, you have to get through conflict areas that the team is likely to have. Here's what happens. People are polite. or people are passive aggressive, to use an overused term. And when people are polite, they don't confront others with their issues. So let's imagine you've got a team of a half a dozen people, and there's somebody who consistently doesn't get their work done, doesn't do what they say they're going to do. And basically, because people are being polite, no one ever confronts that person and holds them accountable, or gets to that place where you can say, look, Bobby, we know that you are busy, but we're seeing a pattern here, and how can we help you get through that? You don't even get to that discussion because people are afraid of the conflict that kind of discussion might raise. Getting through that is one of the most key things of getting to high productivity teams that actually accomplish innovation. Moving up, a lack of commitment to a project will often lead to a project failure. And the antidote is to focus on why you're doing something. So we're doing this innovation project in order to up our percentage of, seniors that we serve. I'm just making that up. But when you focus on why you're doing something, that's a way to sort of re-engage people and get them to commit to doing what they say they're going to do. And by the way, you'll probably notice that I keep coming back to that doing what you say you're going to do aspect of things. Integrity of your word and integrity of what you say you're going to do has everything, and it kind of runs all the way up and down this pyramid. And that's in fact the next step in the pyramid. Avoidance of accountability is just another way to talk about conflict. Because if you can't confront difficult issues, you're not going to get through them. And in any innovation project, particularly ones where you're really biting off something that's more aggressive and more breakthrough, you're going to hit roadblocks. It's just guaranteed you're going to hit roadblocks. So being able to not avoid the conflict, recommit to the project, and hold people accountable to getting some things done is key to getting top of the pyramid, the results that you want. So this is the 5 dysfunctions of team: trust, conflict, commitment, accountability, and results. And working through and up that pyramid is going to mean the world to you in terms of your ability to succeed. Okay, we have a poll question to sort of re-engage you. And apologies for my talking so much here, but I guess that's kind of part of the program. So what have you encountered in your actual project management and of teams? Do you see an inattention to results? Do you see an avoidance of accountability? Do you see a lack of commitment? Do you see a fear of conflict? Do you see an absence of trust? And I'm pretty sure this is a one choice sort of a question. So you can only pick one. So it's the one that is the most troublesome to your group, I guess, would be the way to do that. And so the poll's in progress, and I'm seeing some results start to come in. And let me know, Sammy, when that poll's actually over with. But all right, here's our results. Let me look at that for a second. Yeah, I'm not surprised that avoidance of accountability is the by far largest choice at 63%. And in a way, though, that avoidance of accountability affects all the other things as well. So if you can solve the accountability problem, you're probably going to solve the others as well. I mean, generally speaking, that is the case. So let's talk for a minute about how, as a leader, to get people to be more accountable. And we'll go to the next slide in a second, but let me finish this slide by saying, basically, you've got to be a little bit like Gandhi when it comes to accountability. So the Mahatma Gandhi was known for always telling the truth and always doing what he said he was going to do. And the British, this was during that conflict of, the Indians trying to gain independence from their colonial rulers. The British really didn't like Gandhi much because he was basically inciting an insurrection and a revolution that would push them out of that country. But over time, it was interesting because when Gandhi said he was going to lead a group of 10,000 people to surround a jail or to make a public demonstration in a public square, they knew they could count on it and that they had to plan accordingly. And that was the stepping stone to the negotiations that occurred that actually achieved Indian independence. So as a leader, the way to inspire accountability is to be accountable yourself and to be very open and honest about what you've done to either live up to your word or not live up to your word. If you've not lived up to your word in any instance and you don't own up to it, basically what you're doing is you're giving permission to everybody in the group not to live up to their word. So having integrity about absolutely everything you do, even outside of the project, in terms of doing what you say you're going to do, is key to establishing that as a foundational component and getting through that block in your dysfunction, your team's dysfunction. So if you say there's a meeting at 10 o'clock, you want to be there at 9:59 and in your seat and prepared to lead that meeting at 10. And if you're there at 10:02, you own up to it and say, listen, I apologize, everybody, I'm a little late, and move from there. That's accountability, and that's where it begins, integrity. All right, then, moving along. I hope this is helpful. I wanted to, So this is an older technology or an older model for looking at how teams work. But it is very helpful because every team goes through these basic steps and incremental ways of being, or not. Because if you're not a high function team, you may not ever get to norming and performing. So basically it works like this. In any team, team meaning two people or more, there's a forming component. And so generally speaking, that's when you're figuring out who you are, what your roles are, what your goals are in terms of the team, and you're going to work together to do this project, etc. So there's a forming step, and usually everybody's polite at this point because hardly anybody comes out swinging in the first 10 minutes in terms of issues they have with the team or the team's right to do something or any of that stuff. However, once you really get going on the content of your project, storming inevitably occurs. And I would have to say it always occurs. Now, sometimes it might be for 5 minutes. If you've got a group of people who really have worked together before, they're familiar with each other, they trust each other, going back to the previous slide, there's a lot of collaborative vibe in the air. The storming can be very brief, and it could be a brief conflict about clarifying the role of this person versus that person. Oh, well, I thought I was going to lead that part of the project. Oh, well, I don't mind if Bob does it because he knows what he's doing there, but could I have that other part? Oh, okay, good. I'll have that. Okay, good. We're clarified. Now we can move on to norming and performing. Now, here's another thing that happens in some groups. If it's a team where there isn't great levels of trust, or there are all sorts of side issues or hidden agendas, storming can last a long time, and it lasts an even longer time when you don't confront the storming, when you don't deal with the issues that are in the storming. So if you're a leader and you're noticing that there's an undercurrent of conflict in your group, the best thing you can do is to raise that question right now and just cope with it. And that's your role as a leader, is to facilitate a group through these issues. Because if you don't, you'll never get to norming and performing. So don't be afraid of conflict. Embrace it. Conflict doesn't always have to be a bad thing. It could mean people are actually made more comfortable. The results of dealing with conflict are more trust, more collaboration, more norming, and more performing. So norming happens when you get through that and, you can focus on the values related to what you're up to. Then finally, as you get things accomplished, you perform and the group gets something accomplished and done. And it's a beautiful feeling when a project comes together and you get to that stage of things. Now, the original Tuckman model stopped there. But as they've studied this over the years, what they've noticed is when a team changes in composition, even one person, basically you have to go through all 4 steps again. And again, sometimes that can happen quickly if a person is accommodated quickly and so forth. Or even one person can sometimes, mess things up and put you into conflict mode for some period of time. And again, as a leader, it's your role to fix that. And here's another thing I'll mention about teams and roles. Sometimes a person doesn't belong on a team. And I think that's something as a leader you need to see. If you think someone has something to contribute and they get into the room or into the process and they are forever becoming a millstone around your neck, if you can't get through the conflict, if you do your best to resolve issues, get through conflict, and it's still not working, do consider the necessary steps sometimes of taking that person off the team. I know a lot of leaders who avoid that for a long period of time because you hate to do it. But oftentimes when you get rid of somebody, and I hate to put it that way, but when it happens, everybody comes to you afterwards and they say, and you're worried about what their reaction is going to be, and they say, "What took you so long?" "Oh my gosh, we're so glad you finally did that because now we can move on and get something done." Now, the other side of that coin is don't get rid of somebody just because they're raising issues. Innovation is about thinking differently. So if you have one person on your team that's thinking very differently, it actually might be a very good thing. So give careful consideration to the things that people bring up that seem to be rugged ideas at first. Because it may be that what they're suggesting is where the group should go. So that's the caveat on the removing someone from the team idea. Moving along, let's go to the next slide. Okay, now as a nonprofit in the area that you guys are in, I'm sure you've heard a lot about diversity. And diversity is becoming a huge thing, in corporate America and around the world. And there's a good news, bad news story about diversity. And I can almost hear some of you thinking, what could possibly be the bad news about diversity? Well, there is just a little bit of that, and I'll explain in a second. But let's talk about the good news first. The good news is the more diverse your team is, the more likely it is that you'll get to innovation. So diverse teams have a higher potential for a breakthrough innovation or even incremental innovation than teams that are homogeneous. This has been studied a lot, actually. One of my mentors in the the innovation space is an old consultant and academician in England by the name of Dr. Michael Curtin, Kirton. And Michael Curtin developed the Adapter Innovator Scale. The Curtin, it's called the KAI, the Curtin Adapter Innovator Measurement Scale, where he basically measured the diversity of thinking style in a team. And he's basically, by analysis of many teams and interactions on many teams, looking over a course of time, has noticed that more diverse teams have higher potential. And the other thing he noticed in his studies is that the more diverse the team, the greater the conflict there is. So thinking back on our previous slide of the Techman model, forming, storming, norming, performing, a highly diverse team is going to do more storming, more frequent storming, and more drastic storming. That's just how it's going to go. Now, as a leader, you've got to work through that in order to get to the productivity you're looking for. But that's why you guys get paid the big bucks, right? So let's talk about how a team can be diverse. When people say diversity, the first place people go tends to be gender and ethnicity. And, that's fair. In the past, we failed as a society many times in inclusion, and particularly in gender and ethnicity areas. So start there. By all means, whenever possible, have gender and ethnic diversity within a team. Ethnic differences bring different cultural aspects into a program, different ideas, different ways of thinking, as does gender. Men think differently than women do about things. It's just that simple. Different people think differently. Age, I think, is also emerging as a huge diversity issue. I personally work with ad agencies in doing innovation training and sometimes on actual customer innovation projects. And, as I've gotten a little older, what I've noticed is that the age gap between me and the team that's doing, the bulk of the work is much broader. So I'm oftentimes working with 20-somethings on projects. And it's interesting that sometimes the things I say get ignored just out of hand, just completely ignored because I'm the old guy in the group. And it's really insulting, number one. But here's the thing. Age usually means that a person has not only just a different perspective because of just being in a different place in life, but they also tend to have another type of diversity, which is experience. And let me tell you, just a moment, my phone dropped off the table there. I'm just getting animated talking about this. So experience matters. And why does experience matter so much? An experienced person has domain knowledge that sometimes younger people don't have. And knowledge of a particular domain can sometimes put you in the box, but sometimes the innovation you want to do is actually in the box innovation. So somebody who knows the nooks and crannies of the box is actually going to be helpful because they know where you can get to another corner in that box and do something new and interesting. So experience matters in combining, old ideas with new ideas. So sometimes a younger person might say, I have this idea that we might do blah, 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 blah. And the older person will say, well, we tried that 20 years ago and where it failed was over here. But nowadays we have a new technology that could address that shortfall. So if we use this new tech and when we do our implementation of that idea you just said, boom, we've got something that's truly a solution. So make your teams as diverse as possible and be prepared to deal with conflict in order to get to productivity. Okay, let's move along. Oh, gee, I had a slide on all that. I nearly forgotten. So you can just see that this has been studied, and the more diversity you have, they don't even talk about thinking style in that graphic. So that was a study that I pulled from somewhere, I forget, but I'll figure that out and send that reference into to Sammy and Uche. But let me talk about thinking style a little bit. So there are, I mentioned Michael Curtin, who developed a scale where a person's creative thinking style can be measured. And so one measure of thinking style is adapter or innovator, and there's a bell curve between those two. And 80% of the population is kind of in the middle. And then 20% of the people that you work with, when you present them with a challenge, they think in a highly innovative way, in other words, differently. So there's that group of people who think differently in order to solve problems. And then on the other end of the scale, and this is also innovative, so don't let the language mess you up, adapters are also innovators, but they think incremental small change in order to improve. So when you're looking at your team and you're noticing how they think and the things they say, the person that suggests an idea that's like, costs $5 million and would take 3 years to implement, they're probably thinking like an innovator. The person that says, well, if we just change this menu item by adding a little more pepper or cayenne, then that's probably an adaptive thinker. And so that's just one sort of lens to look at it through. Another lens to look at it through is something called the foresight measure. So there's an assessment where you can look at and measure how a person thinks across 4 poles. So here are the 4 poles. There's people who think to clarify, so there's clarifiers. There's ideators, big idea people. There's developers, people who are about refining and perfecting ideas. And then finally, there's implementers, people who really move quickly forward towards complete implementation. Now, everybody thinks a little bit in all those areas: clarification, ideation, development, or implementation. And if I threw that out to the group right now, where do you think you are? And then you took the assessment, you probably would not be surprised to learn where your strengths are. Then again, you might be. So for instance, when I first took the foresight assessment, I was surprised to learn that I was more of a clarifier than I am an ideator, because I always thought of myself as an idea person. And I discovered that I'm this high clarifier, which means that I'm forever asking questions about things. And I mentioned this to some people that I know, and they go, "Oh yeah, that's you clarify until the cows come home with their heads caved in, and it drives us crazy sometimes." And I went, "Okay, everybody knew that except me. That was interesting." So awareness of how you think and awareness of how your team members think is actually very important in conflict resolution. So, for instance, if somebody is driving towards completion very quickly and they're not taking time to come up with better ideas, that person's probably an implementer. If a person is in brainstorming and then they stay in brainstorming for a month and they keep suggesting ideas even after you've picked an idea and you're moving into implementation with it, that person's probably an ideator. Or if you're kind of like me and you're forever asking questions and driving people crazy by continuous clarification of something that can't be clarified anymore, you're probably a clarifier. By the way, if you ever are interested in doing the foresight assessment, I can help you arrange that. Just get in touch and I'll help you out with that. I'm what do you call it? An authorized certified administrator of that assessment, the foresight assessment. All right, moving along. Thinking diversity. And we're coming to the question and answer session. But before we do, let's just get a quick check or pulse from you and give us some comments, which Uche and Sammy are going to have a look at in the comment section or the chat section of the tool here. And it'd be great to hear from you, just any roadblocks that you're having, or how, your level of excitement. It would be interesting just to understand if you have a sense of excitement, or if you're kind of, you're moving along and you're making progress, but it feels kind of, plodding. That would be another thing to hear from you about. And, if you're on any interesting projects since Dallas, which is what we had hoped to get people going on. And I'm looking to see if anything is. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Greg. I really appreciate the presentation that you have shared with us today. And so, Linda, Nancy, Sally, Alexandra, Beth, Dan, Joel, Julia, Judith, Melanie, Maisha, we'd love to hear from you today. We have a small group on the phone today, which is awesome. Let's see if we can really be intimate and talk and share about our status of our innovation journey. Love to hear what you're working on. Love to hear what excites you about the projects that you're doing. So many of you are at least have a project in your hand, a project that you're thinking about. We'd love to hear where you are, what's stymieing your progress, or what you would love to continue to do moving forward. Love to see your information in the chat box, and we can talk more about it. For now, I would share about a project that we're working on. We here at the Resource Center are pulling together what we're calling a new directors, senior nutrition directors resource guide. And for this guide, it's going to be online on the Resource Center website. And it's just going to be a basic guide to help people who are new to our network get oriented around aging and nutrition services. And so it's a great project. And some of our challenges now is making sure that it meets the need for a diverse audience. There's so many people that have so many thoughts on what that could be. So we're working together across a group of subject matter experts to put this resource guide together. So that's a project I'm working on, I'm excited about. I look forward to rolling that out to share with everybody across the network later this fall. So, thank you all for any comments that you might share with us. And let's look to see who has provided us some comments. I know, and I'm going to call out folks now because I know some of you on the line, so please forgive me. Alexandra is working with her state on an exciting project looking at innovation in the congregate nutrition area, and perhaps you have some exciting things to share with us about where you are. I know that we had a chance to talk in Dallas about what was exciting for you with this work, and I think a lot of it was just a sense of momentum, how interested folks were around your state about addressing innovation in the congregate nutrition program. We talk about declining participation, we talk about the need to contemporize, and you felt that this was really a very timely project for your audience. Thank you so much, Linda, for your comment. It sounds like we're having some audio issues, so I'm going to try to speak clearer to make it easier. So please let me know, Linda, if this is better. Greg, how about you? How about a innovation project that you're working on what excites you. Before you answer, I'm going to share with everyone on the line that we just heard from Sally in Tennessee, and she's sharing with us that they launched a new team called the Refresh Team, and they'll be working on people strategies. That's culture, innovation, leveraging technology, accountability, so much stuff. And Sally is sharing with us that her team is in the forming stage. So thank you so much. Thank you, Linda. Got it. Greg, how about you? Do you want to tell us about an innovation project that you might be working on and what excites you?
You mean this, Greg?
Yes, this Greg.
Okay, I wasn't positive, so I had to ask. Well, you know, I'm always working on something. I'm working with a restaurant chain currently, and very commercial name that you would know, but I can't say who it is exactly. But they're looking to refresh their menu. So in a way, it's somewhat similar to some of the things you guys are doing. And I'm going to be going to Texas next week to work with them on ideas for how to refresh their menu. And I'm saying it generically because it's actually much more specific. And if I started talking to you about that, you would know who it was. So I can't. But it's challenging because in corporate America, innovation happens within a very narrow framework sometimes. And so, you know, a lot of guardrails around what can and can't be done. You know, it's easy to have ideas for things when, you know, the sky's the limit. You can do anything you want, but in reality, that's hardly ever the case. And I'm sure your participants and the participants in this call are under the same, you know, guardrails. A lot of safety regulations, a lot of government regulations related to food delivery of any kind. So that's, you know, something I'm working on.
Thank you so much. We'll just do this last one and shout out, and then we'll continue for the interest of time. Thank you, Alexandra, for your comments. It seems like in Iowa, they have developed an innovation guide at the state level for all AAAs to innovate based on the following barriers. And these are barriers to participation in the congregate nutrition program: nutrition requirements, menus, service delivery, the environment of the meal site, funding, intake, and marketing. Thank you so much for that. That's great information. We'd love to get that guide, and if you can share it, that would be wonderful. Greg, take it away, and we can keep moving now with the presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Well, only have a couple things left to say, but basically, knowing that you're a volunteer-based organization, or have a lot of volunteers, it's not entirely, I guess, enrolling others in projects, you know, I've been talking all day as if you have a team, but sometimes you have to get a team, and that means you have to enroll others in order to get them to help you with projects. So the first thing is to ask, and don't take the first no or evasive answer to be the final answer. Keep talking to people about it, keep being in dialogue about it, and that's how you can enroll people sometimes, is just to keep that conversation active. So don't ask once and then forget about it if they say no or if they evade it. I'll, you know, give you an example. I do some work with a local garden here. There's a famous garden in over near Notre Dame called Fernwood. And, you know, they're a little out in the countryside, and they have difficulty recruiting volunteers because they're not near a major metropolitan city. The closest city is South Bend. And so they asked me to do some work for them, and some professional work, and I wanted to get paid for it. And I lowered my price, and it looked like I was going to do something for them. And then they finally said, "Oh, we can't afford that. I'm sorry, you know, we'll have to move on. But one of their board members said, gosh, you have such great ideas, and we would really love to have you working with us on something else. And so that got me thinking, well, how could I help them without charging them anything? And then I basically ended up volunteering to do a brainstorming session for nothing. And the reason that happened is because they kept in conversation with me. So stress the benefits, stress your values, and don't sell people so much as convince people that this is what's good for everyone, and that's what's positive about it. If necessary, beg, and I say that joking, but in every relationship in life, there is a status aspect to it. And when you put yourself at lower status and say, gee, Jim, or gee, Mrs. Smith, we really, really need your help with this. I don't know how we're going to do it otherwise. And you sort of put yourself at lower status. It's not exactly begging, but that lower status gives people a great feeling sometimes that, oh, wow, they really need me. I better help out. Find small ways that you can get people involved. So before you get someone involved in a strategic project, get them involved in something that's smaller and baby step into higher levels of involvement. Okay, so let's talk about road mapping and scheduling the first accountability call. So if you haven't done your roadmap yet, please do it, because it's just the thinking that matters most. And it's going to be a work in progress. And it doesn't have to be exact, or it can be ambitious, but take the time and trouble to get that done. So the projects you do are who you are, and context change. We realize that. But getting into a cycle of projects is what's going to change your organization and transform your organizations over time. So you should be thinking about what projects you're going to do, and think about when you might do them, and keep that thinking in your head at all times. And in fact, make it visible. So put that chart up on the board or on your computer somewhere where you can see it, and it'll kind of nag you to think about it now and then. Okay, so we'd like you, those of you who'd like to do this, to basically match yourself with a partner, and then schedule that first call. And I forgot how we were going to do this. Apologies, Uche.
Oh, great.
Can they do
no
that?
worries.
Okay, so are you going to handle that after the call?
Yes.
The matching and scheduling?
Yes.
Okay, so let's move to the next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so we have just a couple minutes left. Anything that's coming up for you right now that would be important to helping you move forward? So this is your chance to chime in on any old question whatsoever, and I am available afterwards via email or through your portal.
Thank you so much. We invite folks to enter their questions. We'll get to them in the few minutes we have left. And also want to take the opportunity to advance, while you're thinking about questions you might want to share, talk a little bit about where we go from here. These are just questions to ponder. What do you see as innovative? If you haven't sort of considered what kind of project you might want to see that's a step in that direction, what kind of projects do you plan to do? What's next on your innovation journey? These are all great food for thought questions that you might have that could help along your journey. And so next up, after thinking about these questions, I'd love to take a moment to help you take stock. What did we address in this training series that we've had starting way back in the summer till now? We talked about innovation, why it works, how to manage projects, manage teams. We have some few tools that Greg shared with us on forced associations, challenge mapping, brainwriting. We talked today about addressing dysfunction and change management, and Greg provided us a ton of tools. So I'm hoping that taking all of the training we've had in consideration, you'll see that there's a lot that we've talked about that can really help us be more innovative, develop sustainable projects that help up our applied creativity game. And so while you're thinking about questions that you might have for Greg, please keep these resources in mind. We want to be a source of inspiration to you as you continue along your innovation journey. We have new issue briefs on the Resource Center website. One of them on innovation. We have some upcoming training that you might be interested in that might help spark some ideas for projects. We want to let you know that we will be collecting information on innovation projects that were funded in 2017. They have finished their grants, the ACL Innovation Projects. We will be putting together all their learnings in one place to make it easy for you to be inspired and replicate the work that they've done. So that's coming up in the spring. So there's so much more coming down the pike. We look forward to sharing all of these resources with you. One question that came in really quick is how many projects, Greg, are manageable at one time for a group of 3 people in your professional estimation?
Well, it depends on the size of the project, or, just exactly how big of a thing you're taking on. So it depends. But for a group that's small, I would say, generally speaking, stay focused on one at a time. But if you're focused on one big project and there's another little project that comes along, you might be able to handle more than one at the same time. It's kind of a judgment call, but focus matters. So I would, generally speaking, advise for less rather than more.
Beth, I'm going to turn it back to you. Is that a feasible approach for your organization? One at a time? Sometimes it feels like that's a luxury sometimes, but focus matters. I'm wondering, Beth, if that would work for you, do you think? You can let us know in the chat box. If others have questions, you can let us know. I think one question that had come up was about accountability. After you show you're accountable as a leader, sometimes that doesn't do the trick, Greg. I'm wondering if you have final thoughts on that issue of accountability. If after you're demonstrating, you're modeling, you're still having challenges, what would you suggest in addition to Gandhi as an approach?
Well, if you're being accountable and you're leading by example, then if you have a pretty good record of that, then you're in a better position to hold people accountable. So that if people are still not being accountable, there's 2 things I would suggest. One is start measuring it. So, for example, let's say that somebody's tasked, and I'm just making this up, with painting a room, and they're the company painter. Start measuring how many rooms they get painted, and just let them know and visibly display the measurement around what they're up to. And so if you've got a project plan and people are missing their steps, put it up on the wall. And it shows that you've clearly missed steps and clearly things aren't getting done. So make it visible. And sometimes you don't have to say a word. It just becomes clear that, we've got to get into action here. And then the final thing is to call people on it. To say, look, we're seeking to get this thing done. We're seeking to get this innovation in play. And we're not becoming successful because people aren't getting things done. What can we do to get you people to get this done? How can I help you with that? And so, put it on the table and confront that. And maybe there's something you can do about it to address the blockage. So measure it and confront.
Thank you, Greg. Those are excellent suggestions. Thank you all so much for the questions, for your comments, for your interaction. We are at the close of our training webinar series looking at innovation, sustainability, and applied creativity. Thank you all for joining us. Please stay tuned for more, and we'll be sending around a recap so that you have an archive of our conversations today. You know how to reach us. Stay in touch and stay tuned. Thank you, Greg, so much for your support in this training series, and have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you.